What up, good people? It's me, Johnny, back at it again with another video. And I saw an article recently about this rumor that Sony is basically in the works to make a live action Spider Gwen movie. And the first thought that came to mind was that the last Spider themed movie that they made that happened to have a woman being the main character, and just how much of a dumpster fire that movie was made me want to totally dismiss this. I gotta be honest. Plus, there's a rumor, and I think actually a confirmed rumor, about a live action Spider Noir movie getting made with Nicolas Cage, which I definitely will be covering here on this channel. But having said that, even though I thought about how later this year, we are supposed to get the second part of the Across the Spideyverse film, which had her in it, and just how awesome her character was, in my opinion, in that movie, it gave me some hope that maybe Sony will bring in the right people to help make this movie so it won't flop like that movie that even made Morbius seem like a halfway decent film. That said, I want to give my thoughts about what Sony could do to not have this movie suck and a character breakdown of sorts for Gwen Stacy, Spider Gwen's character, of course, according to Marvel Comics. But before I go further into this, if you enjoy the content in this video, please, for me, like the video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell so that way anytime a new video gets uploaded, you will be alerted. Also, if you want additional content from me regarding other topics and you enjoy a good podcast, check out my podcast. That can be found anywhere podcasts are being played nowadays by searching for the same name as the YouTube page. But without further ado, let me get back into this. So let me say for Sony, while making this film, I don't think they actually need to do an origin story for Gwen Stacy, considering the fact that we already have that in both of the animated films that we've seen with Into the Spideyverse and then Across the Spideyverse. We know that Gwen Stacy first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man number 31 that was written by the great Stan Lee and Steve Ditko back in December of 1965. Now, in this comic, and when Gwen Stacy's character was first introduced, she was really just a peer of Peter Parker and Harry Osborn as, they kind of started their run in college. Nothing super powered about her at the time. She was more of a love interest of Peter at the time, and that was long before Mary Jane got introduced into the Spider-Man verse, and that she became a love interest of Peter Parker. But it wasn't until Edge of the Spideyverse number 2, I believe, that came out in 2014, which was written by Jason Latour and Robbie Rodriguez, that Gwen's Spider character actually came to the forefront. So in Marvel Comics, this version of Gwen, much like we saw at the beginning of Across the Spideyverse, was bitten by a radioactive spider instead of Peter. And during this same comic, she had to fight Peter, who had become the lizard. And much like we saw in the animated film, Peter was killed, and then she went through a lot of emotional, trauma. To make matters worse, she had to reveal to her dad that she was the Spider Woman after her dad, who was the police chief, was going to arrest her because he thought, much like we saw in the animated film, that she, was responsible for killing Peter Parker. The only difference in this comic versus, what we got in the movie is that Miguel O'Hara and the Spider Society didn't show up to save her because they didn't need to, because her dad actually let her go after the whole speech of "I'm doing right, just like you taught me to, dad" speech. That didn't work in an animated movie, but it worked in this comic. Having said that, since in my opinion doing an origin story style movie should be off the table, just what element of Gwen Stacy's Spider Woman story we actually going to get, and is Sony actually going to tell? It appears that, looking at some of the leaks, that Sony kind of wants her to be their own standalone character instead of appearing beside the likes of Miles Morales. This might actually be due, though, to the fact that there are other rumors coming out from Marvel that in the next Tom Holland Spider-Man 4 movie, that Miles is supposed to appear in this movie. Now, we don't know in what capacity he will be appearing, but since Miles is out and Sony can't use him since he's going to be used by Marvel, because I think they kind of want Miles Morales to kind of be their new Spider-Man once Tom Holland moves on. Sony seems to be trying to go the route of building its own Spideyverse, if you will, with their brand, with Morbius and Madam Web, and it just makes sense that for them, well, they need a primary Spider-Person since Tom is owned by the MCU, so they're probably going to build a Spider-Gwen. Now, if this live action movie version really does get made, though, since certain parts of these superhero movies, as we watch them through the years, tend to bring in some elements of the comic, I think they should use a lot from the Ghost Spider comic line, starting with number 5, written by George Molina, that I believe came out back in 2019. Since we are in the era of the multiverse, I figured they still will want to, tie some of that into this movie. And this comic book story will kind of do some or a lot of that, depending on how much they want to peel from this story. Doing this particular comic book story, she ends up in another universe, 616 to be exact, where she ended up running into an enemy called the Jackal. Now, the long and short about the Jackal is he's a biochemist named Miles Warren that is really, into cloning and doing experiments on himself, who in Marvel Comics has been a villain for Peter Parker's Spider-Man. To me, he's a perfect villain for the first, Spider-Gwen movie because he's kind of known if you're a Spider-Man fan, but he's also not that important enough of a villain, that can actually go a long way to building up Gwen's character in the very first live action film that we're going to see her in. To get back to this comic though, and why they should use it, outside of the villain in the story, you have John Jonah Jameson, who was wanting to find Spider-Woman to try and get rid of her, which is right on cue with his character that we've seen right in Spider-Man movies, while the Jackal actually wanted to use her by getting her necklace that he believed would allow him to travel the multiverse. At the end, the Jackal, of course, ends up killing Triple J and was about to attack Mary Jane, but Gwen ends up spoiling that plan. Well, with a little bit of assistance from Mary Jane, the Jackal ended up escaping anyway. The movie doesn't have to use the multiversal plot, like I mentioned, from this comic, since it is the first movie that they will be putting out with Gwen Stacy Spider-Man, but, having another Spider-Man villain introduced, plus the general theme with Spider-Man movies that we've seen, which is someone important dying, and having John Jonah Jameson die would actually be kind of crazy considering, I like to think of him as the voice of Spider-Man, and he's pretty synonymous with Spider-Man films. I know none of this sounds spectacular, I know, but I think with the first movie, Sony needs to go the safe bet route with this film to start out. Let me know if y'all think they should go over the top with this, but I really think they need to actually start slow because so many of their other projects just bomb. I think they just need to put out a pretty good movie that's going to get fans invested in her character to want to come back for more. To finish out, though, her character breakdown from the comics, Gwen doesn't have any special powers that we haven't seen the Peter Parker's version of Spider-Man have. In Marvel Comics, since her introduction, she mostly always was tied to either some multiversal thing, right? Or groups like the Order of the Web, which was a spider group led by herself and Miles Morales, Web Warriors, and Sisters of the Wasp. Yes, I'm sure y'all already know what that means. Pretty much all, women-led teams. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Just saying. If more leaks do come out, though, about this movie and, the villain in the movie that they're actually going to use, then, I'll come back and do maybe a character breakdown about that particular villain. But let me know in the comments if you think this movie has potential or if you think Sony is going to bomb and missed the mark again with this one, as they have with a lot of their other movies. And hey, what do y'all think Sony should actually do if they do decide to make this film, just like they're going to make the Spider Noir movie? What do y'all think they should do to make this movie great? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And until the next video, I will talk to you all later. Have a good one. Take care.